All right, welcome to the Carl Jackson Show podcast. This is your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Guys, today I have a guest with me. This is a different type of guest, but I think a very interesting guest. I think you're going to enjoy this program, and I think it's actually what many young people need. I have joining me today Scott Phelps. He is the executive director of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. Scott, some people, when they hear abstinence, they're like, what is that? Does that still exist? But it does.
Yeah, and you started off talking about clarity in the midst of confusion. That's really what our program is all about. Our kids are being raised in, think about the confusion that our kids are being raised in, particularly in terms of sexuality. And it's gone over the falls in just the last few years. I mean, it's been bad since the sexual revolution. But the last few years, we've gone over the falls with all this craziness that is being pumped into our kids at a very early age. Our whole program is to help kids gain a sense of clarity and understanding in the midst of all of that mess and confusion.
You know what? That's so well said, Scott. And listen, I'm thinking about you talked. You speak of the confusion. Now look at how kids are being brainwashed into this trans agenda. I forget what state it was that saw a 4,000% increase since the beginning of, or pre-COVID, up until now. And a lot of this stuff is just nonsense, in my opinion, where I think kids are looking for a purpose in their life. And ironically, the more that I think about it here, Scott, I think abstinence, this is a great opportunity for you and for your ministry, because I think kids do want purpose right now.
Oh, it absolutely is. And listen, the kids aren't the problem. When we get our message in front of kids, they absolutely eat it up because it is the anchor in the storm. It is the dock at the side of the river, right? They're being washed away. Our kids are growing up in a Miley Cyrus culture. They're just being swept away, and they don't know, where to grab hold. And so what our program does is offer them clarity and truth and perspective such that they can gain a solid footing. And kids absolutely eat it up. The problem isn't the kids. The problem is the geniuses up top, the administrators, the smart people, the politicians who think they're so much more intellectual than people who teach abstinence. And you started off the show asking about the question abstinence. And unfortunately, Carl, I'll tell you this. There are very few programs around the country left teaching what we teach.
Yeah.
Most people who used to teach abstinence until marriage have, thought that, that's a little too old-fashioned. We need to sort of make our program sound more like sex education. Listen, sex education is detrimental to our kids. Our program is not like sex education. It's an exact opposite of sex education. It's an alternative to sex education. What most people don't understand today is that Planned Parenthood is not only the largest provider of abortions in America, they are the most influential sex education program in American schools. Planned Parenthood is behind much of what our kids are taught in public schools around the country. We exist to counter that, to provide schools. We work mostly with public schools and private schools, but most of our work is in public schools. And we exist to provide schools with clarity and an option to the crazy sex education that's being pushed on our kids, especially in places like California.
Scott, let me follow up on that issue with Planned Parenthood, because that sounds contradictory. It's fascinating to hear that if Planned Parenthood is responsible for a lot of sex education around the country, yet they're also the largest abortion provider in the country. That's a little bit insane. Square that for me.
Yeah, well, it goes to the sexualization of our kids. And so much of what is taught is, look, sex education is nothing more than a codification of the sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s. What was the sexual revolution? You don't have to be married. You can get yourself some contraception, have sex with a whole bunch of people. It'll be fabulous. What could go wrong? And what we've seen as a result of that is the chaos regarding sexuality, and all the sexual deviancy in our culture that we're seeing and experiencing has grown out of the sexual revolution. And so that is very much the message of Planned Parenthood in schools: is marriage isn't something that you need to be considering or thinking about, what you need to be thinking about and considering is what type of contraception and how many different types of contraception are you going to use when you become sexually active if you're not already. And here's a number of different ways that you could be involved sexually and all the different types of, it just goes on and on.
Sure,
so yeah,
sure.
it really does go together, unfortunately.
And Scott, let me give you just a bit of my background here. I recall, I grew up in Los Angeles, California. And I recall in my junior high, I went to Hostler Junior High in a city called Linwood, California, right set between Compton and Watts. And I remember sex ed in the 8th grade. And this was warring in my mind, to be frank with you, because I grew up in a very conservative church, albeit it was a cult, but nonetheless, it was a very conservative church. No sex before marriage, so on, etc. That is what we taught. And then I went to, and this is 2020 hindsight. I did not realize, obviously, how crazy liberal California was becoming, at the time with sex ed, where you were taught to put a condom over a banana and so on, etc. And I remember at that young age, that thought process weighing or kind of waging a war in my head. And I'll be frank with you here, Scott. My desire, given the way that I was raised, was to make sure that I saved myself for marriage. And I'll be blunt with you, I failed. I fell into the trap of sexual immorality. And when I fell into the trap of sexual immorality later on, I ended up having a child out of wedlock. My daughter, love her dearly today. But it brought on all types of consequences that younger people cannot fathom. And I sat there thinking to myself, man, I wish I wouldn't have gone down this road. Now, I'm thankful for my daughter, but that was the thought process that I had, because it screwed me up in so many ways. In particular, you make bad decisions with people you should not be with, in my case, women that I shouldn't have been with. I knew I had no business being with. I had no desire to marry these women, but I was engaged in what was essentially these soul ties, but it distorted my view of women for quite some time until the Lord saved me, if you will, and I became a Christian.
Yeah, and what you're saying is unfortunately quite typical, right?
Yeah.
And it's that sex education really sort of normalizes sexual activity for teens without actually helping them understand the significant implications and long-term impact of that sexual activity. And what we want kids to understand is not that sex is a bad thing, but it's best reserved for the context of a marriage relationship, that marriage provides a safe, healthy context for sexual activity to occur. It's not, here's all the terrible things that can happen to you if you're sexually active. Rather, our programs are completely inspiring and generating hope and giving them clarity for the future. Sex isn't a bad thing, but reserving sex for the context of marriage is factually, objectively, provably the safest, healthiest option for you when considering sexual activity. So we want kids to have the opportunity to understand that. Our mission statement is that we believe that every teenager in the country should have the opportunity to hear a clearly reasoned, positive presentation on the benefits of abstinence until marriage and instruction on preparing for a healthy future marriage. We are A and M, abstinence and marriage, because, Carl, as you said, what we're really trying to do is help young people understand and prepare well for future marriage and family. And we think that it's best for children to be born into a married home. It's best for them, objectively, regardless of a person's religious perspective or beliefs. Sociologically, economically, demonstrably, it is best for the children, best for the couple, best for the culture, best for the community when children are born in the context of a marriage. And so one of our greatest drivers or passions and concerns is the high non-marital birth rate at 40%. Today in the United States, 40% of American children are born outside the context of marriage. And that has significant implications for our culture. And we just believe that if we're going to strengthen and restore culture, it begins by helping young people understand the value of marriage and why waiting for it matters.
I want to go back to something you said that I think is so instrumental, and a lot of people may not understand this, but I can recall a time in my life. I remember when former President Bill Clinton kind of changed the definition of a family, and I was a secular liberal at the time, but I got to tell you, when he was saying some of the things that he was saying, and I forget his exact statement, I forget the exact quote, but it threw me off, and I remember warring with that in my mind, and I'm sitting here today, and I think, man, it's a shame that people that are born into a family, a wife, a husband, children. Sometimes the children, if you go into a public setting, they may feel ashamed that they are, embarrassed that they are, when in fact the opposite should be true. There was so much, how do I put this? There was so much leeway and I guess consideration for children that had been born outside of wedlock, single-parent homes, that all of a sudden we didn't want to offend them. So instead, what we ended up doing was destroying this concept of, listen, even if you screwed up, you're single mom, single dad, even if you screwed up like I did initially, you don't bash the ideal situation for children, which is marriage between a man and a woman, because that's still where you should desire to be when you grow up.
That's right. They should have the opportunity to learn these things, no question about it. And so when I am speaking to students, knowing that a large percentage of them don't have what I'm saying is so fabulous, that is a married mother and father, because we know that 40% are born outside the context of marriage. So if I'm talking to a group of students, I know that there's a large percentage that don't have that. So when I'm communicating these things, I say, now, am I saying that a single mom can't be a fantastic mom? Of course I'm not saying that. Most single moms are heroes. They're working really hard. And if you live today with a single dad, a single mom, help out around the house. Do your part. Your mom's working really hard to take care of you. So in other words, I want to honor and support those who are in that context, but that doesn't mitigate me explaining to them what is the ideal. So I want to explain to them, what do you want the future to be for you? And what do you want to be the future for your kids? Do you want your kids to have the best opportunities for the future? And so all of it comes back to the decay of marriage. Marriage rates are at an all-time recorded low in our country, and that is having significant implications for our culture in terms of civility, in terms of economics. There's just so many implications when you have failing marriages, you have failing cultures, and you have a failing civility. And so we believe that the restoration of marriage is central. It's at the core of what ails America. And the best way to restore a culture of marriage and family is to help young people understand and appreciate why it matters for them.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, Scott. And again, I'm speaking with Scott Phelps. He is the executive director of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. Scott, look, before I get to my question, where can people go to find you online, social media, etc.?
Yes, thank you. ampartnership.org. ampartnership.org is our website. That's the best way to get a hold of us.
Okay, so ampartnership.org, ampartnership.org, ampartnership.org. You spoke about the economics of marriage and family, and it's so true. I want to dive into this just a little bit deeper, because just on a practical level, right now the population growth rate of in America, the population growth rate in America has, I forget what the exact numbers are, but I think we're down to 1.7, something like that.
1.6 is the fertility rate is 1.6, correct.
Okay. All right, Scott. All right, you're on top of this stuff. All right, so 1.6 is the fertility rate. Basically, we're not reproducing. I mean, this is going to lead to, you're talking about like Japan, where Japan is just experiencing, they have this elderly generation, and they have a younger generation that essentially can't take care of the elderly generation. They just have too many old people. And we're going to be in the exact same predicament. Not only that, but let's face it, if you want taxpayers, you have to produce babies. And the last thing I'll say, I'm going to get your response to this. You're almost guaranteed not to live a life of poverty, at least in the United States of America, if you, for one, make sure that you graduate high school, you get a job, you get married, and then you have kids after you get married. Your response, Scott?
Well, you've brought up a lot there. The last thing you just mentioned is what we call the success sequence. And that is the name of our curriculum, by the way. The curriculum division that we provide for schools is called the Success Sequence Program. And it is, as you said, the success sequence is 3 simple steps according to researchers. If we can help our kids get an education, graduate high school, GED, or college, get an education, get a diploma, that's number 1. Get a job, learn to be self-sufficient, not dependent upon your parents or the government or welfare. And then third, wait to have children until you're in a marriage relationship. Researchers say if you can do those 3 things, it's almost impossible to end up on welfare or in poverty. So the success sequence is very much what we're helping young people understand and appreciate. Get an education, get a job, get married prior to having children. Do those 3 things in that order. Chances are things are going to work out pretty well for you. But kids don't know that, and we need to explain that to them. We need to teach them that. Now, the thing that you're swerving into here on fertility rates is the third of our 3 great concerns. I say that there are 3 key issues, Carl, that animate our work. Number 1, it's the high non-marital birth rate at 40%, as we've said. Second, it's the low marriage rates. And then the third one is the declining fertility rates that you just referenced.
Right.
This is a great concern. 1.6 is dramatically low. Do you know when Russia hit about 1.5, maybe this is over a decade ago, they instituted something called Conception Day.
Yes,
and it is
I remember
as it
that.
sounds. It is as it sounds. Everybody go home and make the baby, you know. And they were very concerned because they had gotten down to about 1.5. We're at 1.6. And what they were basically saying is, listen, hey, we've got to pedal faster. We've got to pedal faster because we're slipping into extinction. We are literally moving toward extinction. Europe is only maintaining its population through immigration. They are organically declining. You mentioned Japan is top heavy. They've got a dramatically older population. They don't have the youth to support the older population. These are the consequences of declining fertility, and it's happening here now too. And through wide access to contraception and abortion, we are eliminating children at an alarming rate. And the lower marriage rates have something to do with that as well. So these are our concerns: the high non-marital birth rate, the low marriage rates, and the declining fertility rates. And Elon Musk has been tweeting quite a bit about this, about the global fertility decline and its implications for society. And here's an article I have right in front of me: Babies Wanted, Nordic countries crying for kids. And this is about Norway. Needing children. So these are the things, Carl, you know, it's funny because when you say, you know, our program is about abstinence, it sounds so minor, so simple, so inconsequential. And yet I believe that the work that we're doing, training up a new generation of American youth to understand and appreciate the value of marriage and family, is very necessarily at the core of all that ails us. I actually ran for Congress about 20 years ago. And I was so glad that I didn't win my race because I believe that this is so much more important than that.
Man.
But I had to get involved because there was nobody pro-life running. And I couldn't vote for anybody. And I kept writing my name in year after year. And I'm finally like, I just have to run myself to save the babies. That's how I got into this work, was to save the babies. I was very concerned about the high numbers of abortions that were occurring each day in America on my watch. I'm like, okay, I'm alive right now while this Holocaust is happening, and I'm doing nothing to stop it. I must do something. And that's what led me to run for Congress, was in an effort to try to save the babies.
Man, I love that.
But I had already started doing this work and felt like this was a much more effective use of my time.
Sure.
We actually spend our time training up and teaching educators, parents, pastors, mostly educators in schools across America, and we work with policymakers, and our whole goal is to reinstitute abstinence education as the fundamental teaching in American schools. It's not that now. The way it works now is kids go to school and they get typically across America, they're typically going to get a Planned Parenthood type sexual revolution message, which says nothing about marriage, but here's all the different types of contraception that you can use. That's sexual revolution. That is the primary message in health class across American schools. If a school teaches abstinence, they might have an abstinence speaker come in for a day or two, like the alternative program. That we exist to flip that script. We don't think that abstinence should be an alternative message. We think it should be the fundamental message that kids are taught. We think the primary message in American schools should be, here's why reserving all sexual activity for the context of marriage is the safest, healthiest, best choice. Look, if I'm a health educator, don't I have an obligation to teach optimal health? Like, I shouldn't be giving them all of the various types of sexual activity that will lead to significant consequences. I should rather be lifting up for them what is the healthiest, most beneficial standard, which is to reserve all sexual activity for the context of marriage. So, Carl, our goal is that American schools would revert to teaching abstinence until marriage as the fundamental lesson in health class in American schools. That's what our goal is.
I like that. I am so glad that you are out there doing that. Again, I'm speaking with my guest, Scott Phelps. He is the executive director of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. You can find them online at ampartnership.org, ampartnership.org, ampartnership.org. Scott, I have a couple more questions for you, but before I do, we could just have to take a moment to thank my sponsor, and that is MyPillow.com. Mike Lindell has built the fabulous company, MyPillow. All right, so MyPillow.com. If you use the promo code GIRL, just go to the radio podcast square at the top of the page, enter my name, and literally they have Giza sheets that are off 50%. They have all types of products that are off, some upwards of 60%. Some even go beyond that. All you have to do is go to MyPillow.com, enter my name, or give them a call, 800-858-0263. Guys, you are supporting American jobs, American manufacturing. You're supporting a patriot and a believer in Mike Lindell. And also, you'll be supporting this podcast, the Carl Jackson Show podcast. So I do appreciate that. Now, I do want to go back to my guest again. We're speaking with Scott Phelps. Again, he is the executive director of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. I do want to ask this, Scott. When you go to high schools, because you teach a program, or your presentation when you go to high schools is called Future Freedom. This is basically a 1-hour assembly. I'd like to know what reaction you get from boys and girls. Do you get more reaction from boys or girls afterwards? Is it about the same? What do you see?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, mostly what we do is train educators, but from time to time I do have the opportunity to go and speak to kids, and I love doing that.
I got you.
And as I said at the top of the show, kids are tremendously responsive. Kids are not the problem. When we can get our message in front of kids, they eat it up. They are hungry for this. They are living in a gray and confusing culture, and there's something about the beauty and the clarity of the message that we're providing for them that resonates. It comports with their nature, and it resonates with them deep inside. And there's something within them that says, yes, that's what I'm talking about. Listen to what a girl said, speaking of assemblies. Here's what one girl said in response to an assembly. She wrote this down on the evaluation card afterward to give you an example of the response. She said this: I think saving sex for marriage is a great idea. I never thought of that before. That's what I want to do. Ding, 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 ding. Now, this is a girl at a Chicago public school who is saying, I've never heard anything like this before, but there's something inside me that says, yes, that's right. That's what I want. That's what we're talking about, a generation of young people, not that have rejected the abstinence message, but what? They've never heard it. They've never heard it. And so this is why we're so passionate about this message, is that we believe that every kid in the country should have the opportunity, that's a key word for us, opportunity to understand these things and learn these things and then decide for themselves. And so, no, kids are tremendously responsive to this. Now, that's girls. Let me give you an example of guys, because you asked about the difference between girls and guys. Another Chicago school. By the way, we're not in Chicago schools anymore. They've essentially kicked us out. We years ago, I've been doing this going up on 25 years now. Years ago, we were in Chicago public schools all over the place. They loved it. But now it's the administrators that have said, no, we're far too sophisticated for that. We're giving them condoms.
Wow.
Listen, Chicago public schools now provides free condoms in elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. I didn't misspeak. Chicago Public Schools gives free condoms to kids in elementary schools and middle schools and high schools, and they will not allow this program into their schools. That's how sophisticated and intelligent the people are at Chicago Public Schools.
And not to mention, the students are becoming dumber than ever.
What's that?
And not to mention, the kids are becoming dumber than ever than in places, frankly, like Chicago and Baltimore. I hate to be so crude, but it's absolutely true. When you read it, when you look at the reading and the math scores, kids are just becoming dumber. All they're being taught is this nonsense.
It's very sad. And that they're withholding from them. Yeah, and so what we're teaching kids is a success sequence, how they can find a clear pathway out of poverty, but our program isn't allowed in the CPS, and those kids would tremendously benefit by what we teach. But when we were in CPS, here's an example of, I gave you a girl, here's a boy. Actually, several boys. I was reading a story to them that is in my workbook Quest, and it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story of what everything that we're teaching. There's no disease. There's no. It's about, I love you so much, I'm waiting until we get married, and I'm reading the story to them. As I'm wrapping up the story, the students begin clapping before I'm even, it's like when you sing the national anthem, people start clapping before it ends.
Right, sure.
It's like that. I'm reading the story and the kids are clapping while I'm reading, and I look up. These are 7th and 8th grade boys, African American, south side of Chicago, middle school. I look up and the boys are standing and clapping for a story that I'm reading about true love and waiting until marriage. I'm telling you what, Carl, there's something deep within our hearts that longs for this, that yearns for this, and we've got to give it to them. And that's our passion, is to give it to them, to provide it to them. And so we're equipping educators, policymakers, parents, anyone who will listen, that here is a way to teach with clarity, objective, factual truth that will be of tremendous benefit to the next generation of American youth.
I love it. I love it. My last question for you here, Scott. This came to mind. I started thinking about the trans issue, the abortion issue. There are people, as crazy as it sounds, out there that really want to depopulate this planet. And I believe that's why so much of this stuff is in headlines and in the news. Radical leftists, communists, fascists, in my opinion. But this trans issue, the abortion issue, it's absolutely amazing. Your ministry, if you will, does the complete opposite. Humans are important. Individuals are important. Life is important. Obviously, marriage is important. I feel like that is a great contrast, and more people need to hear that. You're like the anti-Bill Gates, if you will, when it comes to
You're exactly right. Thank you for bringing that up, Carl. Because here I go so far as to say this: we are not a pregnancy prevention program. Most programs that do what we do are typically referred to as pregnancy prevention programs. The federal government program is called TPP, the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program. We are not a pregnancy prevention program. We do not believe that pregnancy is a bad thing to be avoided. We think that it is a hope to be cherished. And we don't believe that the message to young people should be, don't have sex because bad things could happen to you, like pregnancy and disease, as though pregnancy and disease are somehow similar. No, we think it's really important to teach properly and clearly to our young people. We don't say, pregnancy is a bad thing to be avoided. Rather, pregnancy is something that is beautiful and special and amazing and wonderful. In fact, it's so amazing. Understand the beauty and the joy of reserving that for the context of a marriage relationship. We believe that it's best for children to be born into a cradle, and the cradle is called marriage. And so when we want to help young people understand is not pregnancy is a bad thing to be avoided like a disease, but rather it's a beautiful thing to be hoped for and to be cherished. And we want young people to reserve sexual activity for the context of marriage and then have children and lots of them and enjoy life. We think that is a beautiful formula. That is Psalm 127. Children are inheritance of the Lord, and blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. And we just believe that we need to communicate clearly and truthfully to the next generation that marriage and family are goals worth striving for.
Absolutely love it. And if people, parents, educators want to get a hold of you, ampartnership.org is the best place to do so, Scott?
Absolutely. ampartnership.org.
All right, so ampartnership.org. Listen, Scott, it's been a pleasure talking to you, man. I am glad that your ministry exists. I will make sure that I share this ministry with as many people as possible. God bless you so much for what you're doing. And there's going to be a lot of young men and women I know that'll look back on what you've been teaching them, and educators and all this kind of stuff, and you're leaving behind a great legacy. I'll put it that way. This is phenomenal. I needed to hear this today, quite frankly, Scott. So I'm glad you're out there. I'm glad your ministry exists.
Well, thank you very much. If I could just end with this, too, because you said you're from L.A., and the first book I wrote is called A.C. Green's Game Plan. Did it with A.C.
Yes.
Green. And, A.C. Green, his story was that he was not going to be sexually active. He was going to wait until marriage. Just a great example. So we wrote that book together, A.C. Green's Game Plan. It's the first book I wrote, and we use that still to this day all over the country. A.C. Green does his youth camps for kids, and he uses the book. And this is what we're trying to teach our kids, right? That there are good role models out there. Mike Singletary is one of our endorsers and has been a terrific supporter of the program. And there are good role models out there for kids who are teaching this message. So, and Carl, you're one of them. Thank you for the good work that you do. Really appreciate your show and the way that you lift up things that are good and true and wholesome. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you so much, Scott. And if you will just stay with us till so we can make sure that you're uploaded here. All right, guys, so I appreciate you tuning in to this edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. Again, please subscribe wherever you go to get your podcast. You can rate us on YouTube and Rumble. If you're on YouTube, if you're willing to give us a super thanks, we appreciate it. But if you would just subscribe so that you can make sure that you get this podcast in your inbox every day and share it, we would be so grateful for that. All things social media at The Carl Jackson Show is where you can go to find us. And we sincerely appreciate you being out there. We appreciate our guest today. Again, Scott Phelps of the Abstinence and Marriage Education Partnership. Please share this message far and wide. ampartnership.org, ampartnership.org, ampartnership.org. Until next time, don't grow weary doing good. God bless you.